Okay, so I'm just gonna ramble on for a couple of minutes before the questions start. So I hope you don't mind just sitting there and looking pretty for a little bit.
No props.
Perfect. Okay, so today will be the fourth of our series of 6 interviews that we'll be doing leading into the summer guitar festivals in BC this year. They'll be held from July 4th to 7th in Kelowna and from July 11th to 14th in Vancouver. And you can find more information about them and how to register at vancouverguitar.org. The early bird registration date has been extended to June 7th, so there's still a few days left to get the discount for either festival or both if you're interested. And even if you miss the 7th, you can still register later in the month at full price, space permitting. So again, vancouverguitar.org for all the festival details. Our guest today is Jeffrey McFadden. He'll be one of the faculty at the Vancouver Classical Guitar Festival. Jeff is a renowned performer, arranger, recording artist, curator of the RCM for guitar, and head of guitar at the University of Toronto, as well as a festival director in his own right, and countless other accolades that would leave me out of breath if I even tried to list even a fraction of them. So in short, Jeff is basically a full-on legend in the classical guitar world, and he's taught and performed just about everywhere in North America, South America, Europe, you name it. All the major festivals and institutions, been there, taught there, performed there. And he's actually the teacher of our 2 interviewees from last week, if you remember, Luis Medina and Dan Ramjatan. Actually, Jeff, you might not remember this, but you were actually my very, very first masterclass experience when you came to Vancouver like 10 years ago. I was this precocious little kid playing the Giuliani blacksmith variations, and I was super nervous. And then you suddenly asked me a question about blacksmiths, and I totally knew the answer. I was a super nerd. I spent all day reading fantasy books, so I knew all about blacksmiths. But my brain turned off in the moment, and I just sat there like, and you were so nice. You just said, "Oh yeah, don't worry. I don't know what a blacksmith is either." Which was totally a lie, but we just continued on, and then you started filing my nails. So that was my first master class.
That sounds about right for a master
Yeah,
class with
yeah. So that
nails
was
being filed.
my first master class experience. And I still think about this all the time. Uh, so I just want you to know that I know what a blacksmith is.
Yeah, no, I had no doubt. No, you know what? As a matter of fact, I do recall
Oh
that,
yeah,
and yeah, yeah,
that's funny.
and it was, yeah. I mean, I felt a little bad about kind of springing a kind of arcane question like that on you, but yeah, no, I remember as a young performer, you were really rocking that piece, as I recall. So that's great.
Thank you. So, anyways, in a nutshell, this is Jeffrey McFadden, everyone. So, yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
It's a pleasure to be here with
Yeah.
you.
So, we always start the interviews with something of a ridiculous question. So, I guess my question for the day is how many times do you think you've given impromptu manicures in the middle of your lessons?
Um, Well, I don't have the math skills to even count how many times I probably have done that, right? So
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, just the reasoning for me is I think there's a kind of mystery around it,
Mm-hmm.
around nails and all that kind of business. I don't know how deep you want to get into this right off the bat, but there's a bit of mystery to it. There's a bit of kind of alchemy to it,
Yeah.
and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it
Mm-hmm.
and trying to sort it out because I went through a period as a developing player where my sound would be kind of the way I wanted it to be, the way I imagined it to be
Yeah.
on one day, and then suddenly the next day it wasn't that way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as good, and I just kind of couldn't figure out stuff, and I was just basically kind of trying random strategies, right? And so I just kind of got fed up with that at one point and kind of really looked into it and had some guidance on the matter and kind of did some reading and so I kind of came up with something that I know works sort of universally, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm happy to kind of get people sounding better kind of just immediately like that because it's so much more inspiring to play, when you
Yeah,
kind of are
absolutely.
producing a sound that you imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, no, I do that.
Yeah.
Do that a lot. So, yeah, I think you must have experienced the same thing
Yep.
in our class, which
Mm-hmm.
was
Yep.
different.
Yeah. Seen it myself and also seen it at pretty much every festival I've seen you at too. Like there's at least one in every master class that just gets their nails done. And it's
Yeah.
like the effects are just like instant though, so I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's almost every single time that I've done it, there's kind of sort of an immediate effect, and
Hmm.
so the difficulty is like in a master class, it's I can explain it and I can sort of do it and kind of get you sounding better, but um, what I really would like is for people to be able to kind of continue with that,
Yeah,
and
for
it's
sure.
kind of difficult. Like even if you understand the principles of it, there's kind of a sculpting component to it.
Hmm.
Most of us are good at sort of playing, the kind of sound arts and not the visual arts, right? So
Yeah.
but there is really kind of a visual sort of element to it, a scoping and sculpting kind of thing that
Yeah.
needs to happen, and so that also takes a little bit of time. But
Hmm.
I try to kind of impart some of that knowledge to my
Yeah.
students, anyways, in the more kind of regular lesson setup.
Hmm. I think definitely a lot of it is once you have that sound in your ear, and once you know that feeling in your hands, you have something that you can shoot for. So I guess kind of having that template model that you give somebody lets them weave their way to get to that result by themselves.
It's very true. It's
Yeah.
very true. Like the whole thing has to start with the imagination, with the concept of how you want it to sound, right?
Mm.
Without that, I mean, you're sort of aiming at nothing. So, both modeling it as the teacher, I think, is important, and being able to do it yourself and kind of taking a close monitoring of that and trying to kind of recall it and sort of idealizing it and describing it to yourself and sort of, you know, thinking about it on that level is absolutely essential. It can't, you can file your nails like all you want, and if you don't know what you want to sound like, it's
Yeah.
never going to get there. That's a very good point.
Hmm. So, what are some of your core philosophies in teaching since we're on the subject?
Uh, Core philosophies, I, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. You're asking me to sort of reflect, and reflection is kind of not a great strength of mine. Like I'm, pointing forward. Um, but I think that fundamentally, what we're trying to do is sort of to communicate,
Hmm.
right? And so, if that's the sort of outcome, right? If I want my students to be able to sort of communicate, then regressing back from that, there are any number of steps that they will have to go through to achieve that moment of communication, right? When they're performing.
Hmm.
So um, I sort of start with that goal. I think if there's a sort of overriding philosophy, it's that it's sort of effective, high expressive communication. I think
Hmm.
the guitar tends to be a very narrow sort of expressive band typically, right? Because we're so busy, like
Hmm.
trying to play this rather kind of challenging interface and contraption. So we tend to sort of also, we just were talking about sound. We kind of put sound so at such the top of our kind of pyramid of imperatives and of important things that we tend to sort of not explore the color range of the guitar for fear that we're going to sort of make a sound that's not really at the sort of kind of
Hmm.
polished pro level, and so there's a lot to do in that way, in terms of expanding the kind of expressive voice and expressive range of what we do. We don't tend to articulate, I think, as much as some other instruments do.
Hmm.
Um, so we, need to kind of sharpen that up as much as possible. Every instrument, having said that, has its strengths and weaknesses, right? So you think about like how a violin plays, right? They think about articulation so fundamentally.
Hmm.
Every kind of bow stroke, every note going to the next note has this sort of articulative approach, right? If you think about the harp, by comparison, right, it really can't do that
Yeah.
and doesn't do that, right? So the affordance of the harp doesn't allow for that. The affordance of a violin brings that out in the playing, right? Piano is a different thing altogether as well, right? They can sort of certainly do articulation at a kind of high level. Of course, they can't do vibrato, but they have this great dynamic range.
Hmm.
So, in the guitar, we're trying to sort of be, on the same footing with those instruments, right?
Hmm.
And as much as we can, and all orchestral instruments, kind of orchestral and otherwise, realizing that there are some that are capable of particular gestures very easily and not of others. So the guitar, the great thing is it's really, really flexible. Like there's so many things we can do. We can't do like a real triple forte that's going to drown out an orchestra, right? But that's
Right.
about the only thing we can't do, I think, right?
Hmm.
I'm going to say that anyways. That's the only thing we can't do.
Hmm.
So within the other capabilities we have, I think we should sort of push them as far as we can and use all of those tools sort of in an expressive toolbox, right? And so if that's my kind of teaching philosophy, I sort of regress it back. And then in that regression, it might end up at, well, you just sort of need to know how to kind of choose the right fingering to do the articulation you want, right?
Right.
You could go all the way back to like, here's how you need to move your finger. So it depends very much
Hmm.
on the student and where they are and where the kind of, peaks and valleys are in their kind of experience level,
Yeah.
right? And so that's kind of how I approach it. And I tend to now be able to, like after teaching for many, many years, kind of synthesize after a few lessons what the real essence of what people's pathways are to improvement
Hmm.
and sort of work on that, whether it's like, just kind of fundamental literacy and how you read, whether it's the sound thing, whether it's, any number of other things that we need to sort of work on, position, ergonomics,
Hmm.
so forth and so on, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I try to sort of put them in a kind of sequence where they're sort of vertically integrated, right? So you
Right.
can't really do articulation if you kind of can't move your fingers the right way,
Hmm.
et cetera, right? In each of those instances, I sort of break it down and try to create sort of an emphasis in the lessons and a kind of logical pathway so that the fundamentals are built and then the next steps are built upon those,
Hmm.
leading to that final goal of communication.
Yeah. Wonderful. Makes a lot of sense. Have you noticed anything in common among your students who've really had great success under you, whether it's their traits or mindsets or their approaches to learning, which helps to set them apart and make them really flourish and communicate well with their audience when they're performing?
There's just so many things that kind of need to be in place for that to happen, right? There's a certain kind of fundamental level of just natural ability, of course, but like one of the critical things that I've found is kind of openness to instruction, basically,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, I felt the same thing because I was a student too, many, many years ago, right? And so the teacher would tell me something, it would always kind of, not always, but very often, well, not even very often, sometimes, I would meet that information with kind of skepticism because it
Hmm.
didn't resonate with what I already thought I already knew,
Right.
right? And so, um, but I do think that I was able to sort of take the information and kind of digest it for a little while and kind of synthesize it and use all of it or part of it or integrate it in some way or another, right? So that capacity to absorb instruction and a kind of open-mindedness to it is really, really critical. The other thing is just the level of kind of dedication. So like regardless of the talent level,
Hmm.
right? Which is some people very high that I've taught very high. Um, I've had students that succeed that have both that kind of very high talent level, but just a very, very strong compulsion to sort of learn and to work and to kind of make the necessary, put in the necessary work to get their playing to a kind of automated level, if you will,
Yeah.
and just also like the successful people are also very good at kind of interacting with others, right? So there's this sort of collaborative spirit that's at the center of a lot of that, right? So
Hmm.
both kind of in a purely musical way and then also in a kind of networking way, and people that have succeeded that have worked in my studio also seem to have that and many other traits as well.
Hmm.
But if you find the right kind of combination of all those sort of skills and attributes, then it's quite possible for many people to succeed in this game, which
Hmm.
seems like slightly abstracted and kind of the pathway is not really super clear. It's a bit of a black hole for many, right? Everyone goes through that, right? But at the same time, I think, with that right combination of things, and some combination of them in some proportions, then there's always a good pathway forward, and sort of openness and creativity, and so many kind of qualities that that I think can be kind of mixed together to help with success.
I think a lot of times people really focus a lot more on the playing ability as like the pinnacle that they should be achieving. But could we talk a bit more about some of the important non-musical aspects that people often overlook in this game?
Yeah, well, that's what I was sort of referring to. Particularly like imagination, right? Like so you need like kind of a really good imagination to just in the fundamental way to sort of even make music, but you need imagination to see kind of paths for yourself in the community, right? And so when people have kind of gone through, they come to a sort of a terminal point, finishing a degree or whatever. I always kind of like to have this discussion and sort of prepare people for what they're going to see next, right? Which is always not always super clear, right? Where do I go from here? I have a degree now, so it's not like getting an engineering degree where sort of you kind of shop it around to two or three places, you get a job, and away you go, right? It's very different. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I do try to sort of make sure people have this kind of openness to and readiness for opportunity, right? And imagination, right? So what seems like sometimes a sort of mediocre kind of opportunity can sometimes turn into something awesome, right? If you have the kind of imagination to sort of see what the through lines are there, right? And that's a really important thing. And the kind of career development thing is like kind of happens in fits and starts. So you have to imagine it, but you have to also sort of be a little bit courageous, right? The courage is another thing, like to try something, right? Music study tends to inculcate courage, I think. So that's a good thing, right? But you have to try something. I encourage people just to sort if you don't really feel you know how to do something, just kind of dive into the deep end.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? It's going to happen, right? Try it, see what happens, and you never know. You may well swim very well in that and find something. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. You recede on that one and try some of the other lines of opportunity that become open to the imaginative person, right? So I think there is for everyone sort of a different pathway, but that the sort of imagination, the courage to try things, right? The kind of willingness to be communicative, right? To communicate and to sort of ask questions and sort of meet people, and when meeting people, be able to kind of persuade them, become good at talking to people, right? So I mean, yeah, these are all kind of much beyond like how to do a kind of free stroke with your thumb, but very important sort of career development skills.
Do you think that skills like these are things that could be taught within the institution, within the degree, as maybe like opportunities available or courses or something along those lines?
It's a really good point. I mean, I think we, at least I know at my school, we were always thinking about this at U of T, always thinking about like that kind of career development piece, right? And what we can do to sort of help people. So it can be taught. I mean, it can, at least part of it can be taught. I mean, you can't teach someone to be courageous, but you can kind of teach them sort of what the landscape is like, right? You can teach people how to write a grant. You can teach people how to run an event. You can teach them about entrepreneurship. You can kind of give them a breadth of experience in different things, not so narrowly focused in any one specific area. You can make people feel that they can sort of broaden out their their kind of musical skills, right? They don't just need to play like just Bach suites like I do, but like, they can play any number of styles. The guitar is like, has lots of transferable skills, right? If you can pick up like the guitar you have in your background there, one of those, right? We can play a Baroque guitar, we can play an electric guitar, we can play bass, we can kind of do all kinds of things, right? I like people to feel that that is all sort of also something that's open. I mean, I don't want people to kind of spread themselves too thin. Like, my program, what we're trying to do is teach you to be a great classical guitarist, but, realizing that there are sort of other skills there as well. We have a business of music course. We have like, the sort of independent performing artist course that we've kind of recently started. There's recording courses, composition courses. So that, we try to introduce a breadth of pathways to folks. And so in that sense, you can provide information. I don't know if you can teach some of those core things, but you can at least give a sense of what the landscape is like and sort of help people develop strategies.
A while ago, you were talking about a lot of different instruments and how they have their own features and facets. Is that one of the reasons that you're so interested in making guitar arrangements for all these other things, and then making them work on the guitar?
That's not directly why. I mean, I am very interested in, other instruments. I'm becoming more and more, enamored of chamber music and how the guitar fits into that scene.
So then I guess what's the reason that you got interested in making guitar arrangements?
It's because I just there's certain pieces I love and want to play them, right?
Right.
It really just as simple as that, right? So, it could be anything from sort of like, vocal polyphony to a kind of orchestral piece to a piano piece to a cello piece. I just love the pieces, right? And, just selfishly want to also be able to play them, right? So that's really it. That's the kind of primary impetus for that. And, a lot of this is sort of already built into our repertoire. Some of the music that we play is, necessarily transcription. And so like the other thing is just in an effort to kind of understand what the real sort of origin, the OG is, I'd like to just kind of find out what the real sound is there. What if I can look at the score in its original form, I can kind of see a little more deeply into what the composer was thinking, and that informs the arrangement, right? So even stuff that's already existed, like, we have this long history of transcription and arrangement, starting with Napoleon Coste, really, and kind of going through Targa, of course, and Segovia did it, and everyone else does it too. So rather than depending on those existing ones, I always just like to kind of look for myself and see if there's something that, I might want to change. Sometimes the arrangement's already like perfected, and then I'll just kind of play that. But in other instances, like I just want to have my own hands on it and a little bit kind of deeper take. And as I say, like the real fundamental one is that sometimes I just want to play a piece that I like that doesn't exist for the guitar.
Do you think that learning to arrange is something crucial that all guitarists should learn how to do at some point?
It's not crucial, I don't think. But it's hard for me to imagine, like, if you're immersed in this and kind of searching for repertoire and trying to design programs, that are interesting and sort of unique, that you're going to, at some point or another, want to do this, right? Because otherwise you kind of, put some walls around and kind of constrain what you can do in terms of your program and you're using your imagination. So in that sense, it's fairly essential, I suppose. Not necessary, really. You could do it without it. Like some people just want to practice. That's it, right? And they usually end up being very good guitarists because of that. Not spending their time poring over like which note to play or not to play. But I mean, I think it's certainly helpful. It sort of takes away those constraints that would otherwise be in place, if nothing else.
And is arranging something that you have your students do as part of their degree?
Not always, but I mean, I have done with many students sort of special projects like this. And often like ambitious students will come in, for example, with one of the Bach violin sonatas and just kind of throw the violin score on the on the desk, right? And that sort of is an opportunity to discuss some of the sort of rudimentary things about arrangement, and what often happens in that kind of context. But something more ambitious, like doing a movement from like the three-cornered hat or something, right? It tends to not be something that undergraduates do anyways. Maybe graduate students would kind of do that if they had specific interest in a particular kind of repertoire. But yeah, it happens. It's not sort of an essential or kind of absolutely necessary part of development for many students, but it's something that if the student shows interest in, I would certainly encourage and work with them on that.
You're really, really prolific with arranging. Actually, we've had some people in the chat already who have mentioned, oh, that's the guy whose name is in the top corner of all the pieces that I play. So how did you first get involved with curating the RCM and doing all the arrangements for the pieces in it?
It's some time ago now. I did one of my first really great job, and I've been lucky to have a lot of great jobs. The first really great job was with the Royal Conservatory of Music, and so I was hired there as a instructor. I was just kind of teaching communities people, and there were many reasons why it was just fantastic, even at that. But beyond that, they also had a publishing arm, right? Well, they had also an examinations arm, which everyone knows. Many of the people maybe in the chat have also done exams. So they had the RCM examinations, as it's called, and then they had the publishing company, which used to be called Frederick Harris. And so then they, at one point, not very long after I had started working with them, they decided to kind of expand the guitar series out, right? And so they put a team together, basically, to do this, right? There were some people that were kind of choosing the repertoire and reviewing the other books and sort of redoing the fingerings and everything else. So my job was a very, very kind of functionary one at that point. And this was like back in 1990, maybe, something around that time. My job was to prepare the manuscripts for the typesetter, right? So, like, this is going back a long way. This was like before computers kind of became part of it even.
Yeah.
So we didn't really have kind of kind of music engraving, finale and Sibelius and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, it was like with cut and paste, right? So, we would want to kind of, change a bit of music. I'd have to kind of cut it out with scissors,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And like put a kind of glue stick on the back of it and kind of put it in there and make sure the lines lined up. And then I had to kind of put the fingerings in as neatly as I could. My handwriting is terrible. As neatly as I could, and they all had to be exactly placed. So anyways, it was like, an experience with publishing that was like an apprenticeship, almost felt like the blacksmith, right?
Yeah.
Like, so how do you kind of bring the hammer down? It was like so rudimentary and so kind of, I don't want to say primitive, but kind of, non-technology kind of based, right? It just gave me this very, and the Frederick Harris Music, which was the sort of publishing arm, was just incredibly fastidious. Like everything just had to be exactly the right way and neat and kind of consistent and well researched and all that. It was just like a very high level of sort of expectation for what the final product would be. So I was kind of steeped in that, and that was the first experience for me, just kind of very functional. And the next time, I guess I did a good enough job that they had asked me to sort of take more over the curation part. So every 7 years after that, basically, it's been reissued, right? So that's a number of times. And, eventually it came to be that sort of all of that, kind of collecting and revising of the repertoire kind of came into my hands, and also with my colleague, Robert Hamilton, right? And so it was just an outgrowth of that. And so it was very, very interesting and challenging also to find, a repertoire that kind of really does fit into grade 3, that is a Baroque piece that, satisfies like a dozen other kind of criteria, right? So it makes you kind of search very deeply in the kind of pedagogical repertoire,
Yeah.
in the didactic repertoire, to find music. And also, and not coincidentally, I mean, when something's not there, then you kind of have to make an arrangement of it,
Yeah, it makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
You see what I mean? So that's where that kind of came about. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on to a different side of things, performing. From the audience perspective, it always seems like you're like fully in control on stage. But do you personally have any experience with stage fright or performance anxiety?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think everyone does, right? Um, the I find like after a kind of long layoff of not performing, long is it's all relative, but kind of several months, say, where you haven't played a concert.
Hmm.
That first concert is always kind of fraught with like you know some challenges,
Hmm.
right? If you go on tour, if you're lucky enough to go on tour and you play like 4 times in a week, like the fourth concert is just simple,
Yeah.
right? There's a little bit of excitement and nerves, but like like I can do this. You just go on stage and you kind of have fun,
Yeah.
right? So, but certainly yes. I mean, I have experienced sort of moments of like not feeling absolutely grounded. Um, but I do try to, as much as I can, sort of prepare for that. It's a kind of psychological preparation,
Hmm.
I think. And so if you have time to do it, then you can kind of get yourself sort of steeled against the uh, maybe jitters of that first concert,
Hmm.
you know. And it's important to kind of remain positive, to kind of have accrued a bunch of successful performances, to really be able to kind of convince yourself that yes, you can do this. You really have to have practiced, right? There's no like you could do the best kind of psychological workup. You could have the kind of best technique. Your guitar could be shiny, you know, everything in place, the
Yeah.
exact footstool that you want, the temperature's perfect. If you really haven't done enough practice, you're going to feel nervous because you should be,
Hmm.
right? Because that there's just a little bit of doubt there, and so sometimes you have to go in to a performance and not really have prepared enough, right? The thing is to kind of get yourself to really convinced to the point that you have prepared enough and really actually, objectively be able to say, yes, I have prepared enough. It's not always possible, and then you sort of do workarounds, right? But if you really prepare, it's just the most fundamental thing,
Hmm.
right? The rest is sort of, as I say, kind of managing the psychology of it, which is very very challenging. But there are ways to do that as well. So yeah, of course, I think like anyone else, if someone tells you they've never been nervous going on stage, I wouldn't believe them.
Hmm. Do you have any tips for when the opposite happens, when you're prepared and everything is good, but then the stage is awkward? It's hot or it's cold or the lights are too bright or too dark or the chair is weird. Do you have any tips for quickly acclimating to unperfect situations?
And I think largely it's experience. I mean, the thing is like to promise yourself to be able to put those concerns aside, right? Because we tend to sort of amplify them, and uh, you will kind of never find the perfect conditions, right? So um, I've had enough like really sort of weird and kind of you know, uh, less than perfect kind of pre-performing kind of circumstances
Hmm.
or during performance kind of circumstances that I almost come to know that it's important to just ignore them. At one point, like I was on stage playing duo in Rotterdam, right? And uh, the chair that I wanted a kind of chair that was low enough, right? Like we always do, right? So they gave me a chair. It was almost like a stool. I was like, I can't use this one. So, anyways, give me a better chair. So the only one that they found that was lower was this kind of folding chair,
Right.
right? But it was made of like wicker or like toothpicks, I think, or something. Right? Anyway, so I was sitting on it, and it was like I could tell this is not great, but whatever. Okay, I'm just gonna play. And we're blasting away, ripping away on this music, and all of a sudden the chair just gives out, right?
Oh
And
wow.
I'm like down on the ground, right? So it's like sort of held the guitar up so it wouldn't smash the guitar,
Yeah.
but you know. Uh, so we stopped.
Uh-huh.
But anyways, I didn't, wasn't injured or anything, so I was able to kind of get up, and people like you should have heard the gasp, like
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
audience. What I felt, you just don't expect to see that, right? But anyways, I immediately stood up and I bowed, and they just went crazy, right? And
Yeah.
someone kind of slipped the chair back, and we picked it up right at the same place where we had stopped. So
Wow.
there was that. Another time, like driving all through the night and kind of, getting to a concert, not sleeping, and it's like you got to play now,
Yeah.
uh, being hungry, being cold, being hot. I played in a cave once, right?
Wow. Okay.
Where it was like outside. It was the coolest concert. I mean, it was really great. There was
Yeah.
like just hundreds of people there in this big giant cave in Italy, right? Outside it was like 37 or 38 degrees, like very hot
Yeah.
as Italy does get in some times of the year. And inside it was like 15. Inside the cave it was like 15 degrees,
Oh
right?
wow.
So like just this kind of temperature change, like trying to keep the guitar in tune. It was like had like a layer of condensation on it,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So, anyways, and people kind of moving around and kind of going up and down in the audience, and like I mean, it's just there's so many experiences that you should expect.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be perfect, and just kind of steel yourself against that, and just kind of keep playing. Another
Yeah.
time I was in Spain and. Playing in this little town, beautiful church in this little town. It was great sound. The mayor was there. The city council was there, all kinds of dignitaries. But there was like a sort of local guy who was just sort of very agitated for whatever reason. And he thought like, this guitar thing is just like this person and the guitar, I just don't like this. And so anyways, like you could see him sort of like, just getting more and more agitated. And at
Yeah.
one point he kind of came right for the stage, right?
Oh wow.
And so I had luckily like a sort of I wouldn't say bodyguard, but a kind of friend with me that sort of tackled the guy and sort of they got him out of the.
Wow.
Anyway, so yeah, I love telling those stories. They're real. This stuff
Yeah,
really
yeah.
did happen. So if your hands are a bit cold, well,
Yeah, it's not as bad as getting
carry
tackled.
on. Yeah.
On kind of an adjacent note, do you have any tips for successful recording? Like, do you get red light anxiety when that go button comes on?
Yes. I mean, I think again, it's a kind of preparation. That's a different kind of preparation for recording. The microphone hears everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is you can potentially feel quite exposed when recording, but the important thing is to kind of again I think prepare in the right way. So what you need to be able to do in a recording is to have, let's say the goal of the recording is to what you want to kind of imprint on the CD or on the digital whatever is kind of your idealized interpretation of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we have to be very careful to not sort of compress and play carefully and not squeak and not make mistakes or not make a buzz, because that tends to kind of compress the expressiveness in the piece. And sometimes, even if it sounds like this sort of scope, when it's in the room as you're playing live, it kind of compresses further when you record it, right?
Yeah.
So something that is not, especially just audio only, something that's not accompanied by visuals has to be very, very explicit, and the interpretation has to kind of jump out at you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the best guitar recordings are ones that allow for that somehow are mic'd in a way to kind of give great dynamic range and kind of accent the articulation and everything else. You have to prepare that so that you really have exactly a super clear idea of what you want to do interpretationally,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some people might just say the opposite, like you just need to be spontaneous, and there's probably something to that as well. My approach has always been to kind of know exactly what I want to do and be able to do it, in a small section 15 times over.
Yeah.
With the exact same kind of dynamic change, the exact same kind of scope to the crescendo, the same articulation. Get it just exactly how you want to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in that sense, it's more exacting, but you prepare for that,
Right.
right? In a live performance, some of that stuff can go by. You don't get it exactly and precisely like you want it, but it's still effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are still very happy to absorb into kind of enjoy what you're doing. The recording is a little bit different, but no, I like it. I really like recording very much. I mean, it's just probably I'd rather do that than anything else, I think.
Hmm. Do you have any particular routines and things that you like to do when you're leading up towards important performances or recordings or any like major events like that?
Well, I try to as much as I can sort of be prepared to play, be really where I want to be, sort of in the execution of the piece, well in advance of the performance or recording. Um, just the typical advice, and I think very, very good advice, is to sort of play for others in
Hmm.
that kind of pre-concert period. Like, really put yourself in a sort of true performing mindset,
Yeah.
so that you're going up on stage is not it's not the first time; it's the kind of 11th time or something,
Hmm.
right? You know, um, um, but yeah, that's basically it. I mean, life goes on around you as you're trying to sort of prepare for a concert, so you have to kind of, each pathway is a little bit different, but those are the kind of fundamental things, right?
Hmm.
Just to kind of be prepared early, practice in a sort of, way that will instill confidence in your own kind of capacity to execute it, and then road test it
Yeah.
a little bit if you can before the big event.
Hmm. I think in general, one of the biggest ways for doing these road test things for students are, well, of course, their recitals and their studio class and things like that, but also guitar festivals too. Uh, did you get the opportunity when you were a student to participate in many of these festivals? Were they common events back when you were still learning?
Not really. Um, they weren't. There was very few actually when I was a younger student.
Hmm.
So um, I kind of witnessed that sort of transition where there were very few guitar events, uh, and then a kind of steady increase in the number of them until there were thousands,
Yeah.
right? Which there kind of are now.
Hmm.
So I kind of saw that all happening, right? And it was a very interesting thing to me, sort of like demographically. It's like we're kind of, you know, because of this sort of specific nature of what the guitar is like and what we do, we tend to play solo a lot, and it's just one person, in a kind of nice suit or dress. Chamber music society sitting on stage. The chamber music society is kind of not really interested in that. They want to see more activity, right?
Hmm.
So, anyways, we don't play in the orchestra, you know. So we do what we do, and so we need to kind of make the opportunities. And this was something that was pretty fascinating. People were saying like, "Oh, guitars, like, it's just hopeless. Like, what do you mean?" And then all of a sudden, guitarists just solved the problem, right,
Yeah.
by kind of creating, these fantastic events, right? And they're sort of everywhere, and they're inspiring for young guitarists, and they kind of create places for us to share um, what we do with others, and it's just been kind of a miracle, right? But no, that didn't exist really back in the day. Like,
Hmm.
when I think about sort of when I really started to get serious about a guitar career, it just was not like that. This kind
Hmm.
of Radio France competition. I think the GFA had maybe started. Uh, you know, what else was there? Target competition. Um, just a handful of things,
Yeah.
and you usually had to go abroad, right, to make it happen. So here we are in Canada with upcoming great Vancouver Classical Guitar Festival as
Yeah.
one of the sort of exemplars of what I'm talking about.
Hmm. You're kind of in a unique position where you were in like the right place to just kind of see the explosion of growth for classical guitar in Canada. What kind of sense do you have of the Canadian classical guitar scene, where it's standing now, and like where it's, I guess, continuing to progress in the future?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a reflection of the guitar world in general, like, which, um, again, like it was just smaller, I would say, when I
Hmm.
was really starting out, right? There were a handful of, really fantastic performers and events, and just the level of, like, both the amount and the level of playing amongst the younger generation of people is breathtaking, right? It just is amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. People just play like demons these days, like just play so well and so fluently. I can name many, many young Canadian guitarists, right, that fit into this category. So to me, it's been, just a natural increase. It's just like when they used to take like, what was it, like the first person to run a mile in 4 minutes? It was like some kind of great human miracle, right?
Yeah.
Achievement. We've gone through the same thing in guitar. Like everyone now can run a 4-minute mile, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to. You won't win the race unless you can do that, right? So it's kind of a similar thing in guitar. It probably has to do a lot with the good teaching, right? That has taken hold in the last many decades, and just the natural enthusiasm and talent of the younger generation. So it's very exciting to see. There are many, many great guitarists in this country.
Yeah.
At this point, and it's an ever-growing number. So, I hope it continues. I don't see any reason why it won't. So, yeah, I feel pretty positive about that.
How important do you think these kinds of festivals are for the development of that early cultivation of students and like aspiring professionals?
Very, very important. And that's been another sort of downstream effect of this creation of this sort of spate of events. So it's very important because, like the kind of lesson, the one-on-one lesson is the sort of core of the student's kind of learning experience, right? But just if it's only that, right? If it's only that you have, and then practicing, for the other 80 hours during the week that you're not with your guitar teacher, it's, you can get somewhere, but it's limiting. The things that you learn and see and experience at a festival are invaluable. So you get just new ideas, right? You get ideas that reinforce what your teacher is telling you, which is sometimes a very, very important thing, right? Because, I've had this experience too, where I kind of keep telling the student, like, don't flip your left-hand fingers out so much when you're like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Don't do that. And eventually it's just like, well, okay, yeah, I heard you. Like, and then they go to a festival and a guy says, hey, you're flipping your fingers out. They're like, oh, of course, right? So,
Right.
So you get that sort of reinforcement. You meet people, you see other people play, you model great playing, great sound, like we were talking about at the beginning. Right? You see new guitars, right? You listen to new repertoire. There's just so much that's sort of just beneath the surface of that. So all you got to do is like pay your bucks, go to the thing, and you will benefit from it, right? So I think they're very, very important. Like this kind of extracurricular, if you want to call it extracurricular, co-curricular activity is fundamental. And if you can afford to do it, then you should. Yeah, I think it's really great. I think I didn't do enough of it when I was young, partly because there weren't as many events, and partly because I didn't have any money. So
Very fair. So you spent a lot of time doing guest lectures and workshops and master classes at these kinds of festivals. I think like I've seen you at basically every major one, or like heard of your presence there. So what are some of your considerations when you're teaching these more temporary students that you don't get to see every week?
well, again, you want to sort of give something that helps them get to the next stage, right? So masterclass can potentially be like a life-changing thing, even though it's very isolated, right? I know for me they were. Like, I went to some master classes. Something that the person said, the master, if you will, said, just ignited a sort of thinking in my brain that was like, I don't know what I would do if I didn't know this idea. So I think particularly about Leo Brouwer, right? So I was in Toronto during the time that he was writing the Toronto Concerto, and he was in Toronto as well, right? And so like I just had a lot of classes with him during that time, and those were some of the ones that, were delivered this kind of spark for me. So anyways, I hope that, when I'm teaching, I can kind of take the student where they are at the moment, and just give a couple of bits of knowledge, fundamental or suggestions, or kind of ignite a little bit of creativity that just sort of bring them up to the next level. And hopefully all you can do is like hope that something that you say or kind of demonstrate has that effect of, kind of turning the key for someone, right? So I hope you hope to be able to do that. Sometimes you can see it has happened. Other times it's, not so kind of profound, but always aim for that.
Great. Okay. Well, we're near the end of our time here. So if anybody has questions in mind, I'll leave the last few minutes available for questions in chat. So please ask any questions you have now. And then, yeah, we'll see what our great maestro has to say about them. I have some questions from people that I gathered a little bit ago. We have this guitarist group chat from some guitar festivals. So one of them is asking, have you ever been to the Domaine Forget Festival in Quebec?
Weirdly, no, I haven't.
Oh,
I don't it's just a kind of strange set of circumstances. It just has never worked out for me to be there, either as a teacher or as a student or as an instructor. But I know it's a pretty fantastic festival, and it's a very long-standing one too. So it's been around for a long, long time, and they do a great job there with some great artists.
yeah. Another question, what is the significance behind JMAC YYZ?
Well, when I first started teaching classes at U of T, my students took to calling me JMac.
Okay.
At that point, I had been called a number of different nicknames over the years, but that was the first one. First time I was JMac. So, I kind of took it to heart, and it kind of started. A lot of people started just using that, and so YYZ is the airport code for Toronto,
Okay.
International Airport. So
Right.
that's it. I also like the tune YYZ by
Yeah, fair.
Rush.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Wasn't that, but I will admit, I'm a serious Rush fan too. So,
Great. Okay. Question. With classical guitars, what is the preferred mixing and mastering after recording? In the box or out, meaning fully analog studio?
Oh, I really don't. As long as the kind of outcomes are what you want them to be. I mean, I don't do a lot of sort of mixing and mastering kind of myself, but I think my sense is that the digital tools that are now available are pretty extraordinary. There's a charm to kind of analog production and both analog post-production, I think. But I see such an increase in the quality of kind of digital tools that, I think they are probably just as effective these days, although I don't really claim any specific expertise in that.
Regarding health, do you do anything to kind of counteract the negative aspects of like sitting down all day and being in this guitar position?
Yeah, it's a really great question and very, very important. So we have to proactively sort of counterbalance that. I mean, ergonomically, even if you have all the perfect tools and you sit in the perfect chair and you balance your body and all that, it's just like this repetitive and seated in kind of somewhat static position is, it's a bit dangerous. So yes, I have a kind of whole routine of stretching that I do. If I ever do get a little bit of injury, I'm always kind of careful to do stretching and both icing, and kind of take some anti-inflammatories if you need to. But just general fitness is really great. I mean, we tend to want to baby our hands a little bit, so because you don't want to injure your hands, right? So you don't want to be out kind of chopping wood or, getting in boxing matches or something like that. But, you should do things, I think, that kind of use the strength of your hands and your arms and everything. So everything from kind of lifting weights to sort of doing outdoor work I love walking, so I love hiking. I live close to the Niagara Escarpment, and so I'm kind of, trying to hike the whole distance of the Niagara Escarpment. And so, yeah, it's really important. And, just the most basic thing is like when we're kind of immersed in practicing, and especially if it's going good and you really kind of want to, drill down and lock things down, you end up sitting for a long time. You have to just shake your head loose for a minute and at least stand up. Right? Aaron Shearer used to kind of just say, stand up and walk around the chair, or, stand up and do like jumping jacks for 10 seconds and then then you're good. Your body just can't stand sitting there like that. It wants to move. So we have to remember to do that. And it sometimes means breaking a kind of stream of consciousness, which is like compels you to kind of keep moving forward. But it's very important to take all that into consideration. Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay, another question. When did you first decide that you wanted to become a professional musician, and how did you go about making that a reality?
Oh, a very young age, actually. It was very much centered around the guitar too. Like I just, whatever my life is, I just need to play the guitar, right? And so, yeah, it was from a very early age that I wanted to do that. Like as I came to this, kind of pivot point where you're kind of going from high school to post-secondary education. Like I had also, I have a lot of other interests too. I became interested in maybe becoming a physician, right? I wanted to maybe be a doctor. So, I hedged for a little while between the two, but I was accepted into music school. So I went to music school, but at the same time, with all my elective spaces in my timetable, I took science courses that I needed as kind of like pre-med stuff, So, basically cell molecular biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, and all that kind of stuff. And I took all of those and then sort of applied and almost got into medical school. And then what I did was like, because again, facing that sort of, somewhat uncertainty about how this is going to work out vocationally, I sort of set myself like kind of 5-year goals, right? So I said, I'll do this for 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, I want to have this in place, right? And I aimed very high too, like, things that I thought that is impossible. So almost kind of to give myself an out, right? And then 5 years passed and I had them there, right? And so then, okay, well, I'll just do another 5 then and sort of, set new goals. And I just kind of kept meeting the goals. And so I kept it. And I knew that I wanted to kind of have a performing career. I knew I wanted to do recording. I wanted to have the option of publishing some of the works, both arranging and the pieces that I've written, and to record and so forth. And so, all these things, luckily, helped kind of drive me towards those goals, right? So I knew what I wanted to do, set out the goals, and then sort of took these kind of 5-year increments to sort of examine on the sort of progress of it. And so here I am.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, well, I think that's pretty much all we have for today. So I just want to recap. There's 2 festivals in the BC area, if anyone's interested. The Okanagan Festival from the 4th to 7th at the UBC Okanagan campus, and the Vancouver Festival from the 11th to 14th July at Capellan University, which is where you'll find Jeffrey McFadden here. The application is still open, and there's still a few days to apply to get the early bird June 7th discount. So feel free to go to vancouverguitar.org if you're interested to find tickets for both festivals. And yeah, that's just about it. So to round things off, are there any final things that you wanted to say before we call it a day here?
No, well, thank you, TJ. It's been really fun to have this conversation with you. Great questions, and it's been really a pleasure. And I'm very much looking forward to the festival. We've got a great lineup of instructors, and I know Luis and his team are doing a kind of fantastic job. Very excited to come out. And Vancouver is always one of my favorite places to visit, so I can't wait to meet the students and kind of get reacquainted with my colleagues and friends there. So very much looking forward to it. So thanks for this opportunity to discuss it with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for coming, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you at the Vancouver Festival again.
Me too. Looking forward to it.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.